Hello everyone, welcome. We'll just give ourselves a minute or so just to let everyone join in. Welcome panelists. How's everyone going today?
Thank you.
Thank God.
Good,
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Really great. Thank you.
So, Imam Konda, how are you today?
Alhamdulillah, I'm good. Yourself?
Yeah, alhamdulillah. How's Canberra? How's everything in Canberra going?
Under pandemic and lockdown, like you said. But
Dr.
alhamdulillah, everything is fine, yeah. Life
Yeah.
goes on.
Yeah. Dr. Zuleyha from Melbourne, how are you?
Good. Cold. It's probably, well, it's competing with Canberra, but it's very cold here, about 11 degrees during the day these days.
Wow.
But, you know, we're home. We're pretty much stuck at home, so we're staying warm.
Alhamdulillah, that's very good.
Alhamdulillah.
Here in Sydney, you know, it's about 19 degrees. Sun's coming in.
Don't make me jealous. I was actually born in Sydney. I moved to Melbourne 5 years ago. That was one of the hardest things to get used to in Melbourne, the weather.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Quite different, yeah. I've lived in Canberra too. Canberra's pretty freezing as well. Those morning frosts.
It is. Yes, this morning, yesterday, day before. So we're in the winter already.
Yes. But all good.
Alhamdulillah. So,
Mehreen, are you located in Canberra?
No, I still, my electorate office is still in Sydney, but
Okay.
obviously you travel to Canberra when Parliament is sitting, which hasn't been a lot over the last couple of months, but we're heading back there next week for 2 straight weeks.
have you had any sittings during this period?
We have had 3 sittings.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. But they have been kind of confined and socially distant, and, you know, people who are immunocompromised obviously haven't come to Canberra.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. Yep. But I think we have to have more sittings because this is the time where we need transparency and accountability more than ever.
Yeah, definitely.
Yes.
Definitely. Yeah. Should we get started, I think?
Yeah, why not?
Maybe, yeah. Okay. So I'd like to welcome everyone, you know, to this online webinar. I'd like to thank everyone for attending and taking time out of their day during this rough time. So today's topic is going to be about the world we leave behind. So, you know, this could be interpreted in many different ways, you know, especially from the different generations. So I may interpret it different to the way, you know, the panelists might interpret it. So that's why I'm really excited to see how today's going to turn out, the discussions and all the opinions. And of course, before we start, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land and pay my respects to the elders, both past and present. I'd also like to remind everybody that today's online webinar will be recorded and live streamed on Facebook. Okay, so I'd now like to welcome Ali Alsalami, who is the president of the Australian Multicultural Eid Festival and Fair, to share some verses from the Quran.
Thank you. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والذين إذا ذكروا بآيات ربهم لم يخروا عليها صما وعميانا. والذين يقولون ربنا هب لنا من أزواجنا وذرياتنا قرة أعين وذرياتنا قرة أعين وجعلنا للمتقين إماما أولئك يجزون الغرفة بما صبروا ويلقون فيها تحية وسلاما. Recite the English part. Thank you. In the name of Allah, the Beneficent, the Merciful, and those who, when admonished with the signs of their Lord, do not fall down their reed deaf and blind, and those who say, O our Lord, grant us from our wives and our offspring the joy of our eyes, and make us for the pious ones their Imams. Those servants of the Beneficent shall be rewarded with high stations in paradise because they were patient, and they shall be met therein with welcome and salutations. Thank you.
Inshallah. Very well recited, Brother Ali. May Allah reward you. So I'd like to, before we continue, I'd like to remind everybody that if you'd like to ask a question to the panelists, please use the Q&A function down below. So then there's a section where it says Q&A, just press into it, type in your questions, and later on in the Q&A section segment, you'll have your chance for your question to be answered. I'd also like to acknowledge the Australian Multicultural Eid Festival and Fair, the Islamic Foundation for Education and Welfare, and the Australasian Muslim Times for organising the webinar today. I'm honoured to be your MC for today's webinar. My name is Bassam Maaliki. I'm a 17-year-old second-generation Australian Muslim from a Lebanese background and founder of You Belong Here. You Belong Here is a project I started at the age of 14 to help foster a culture of welcoming for all. A key to belong, hand-painted with a simple message of embracing diversity. As I reflect on today's topics, as a young person who is not an expert, and I'm still living, going through my young stages of life, it's clear that while I listen to people of all ages and many different backgrounds, it's given me the unique experience of learning about the different value systems of many people. It has been very interesting to listen to everybody's stories the last few years while campaigning for change and what is most important in their life, whether they are 6 or 60. In today's world, it may seem our society doesn't practice many values. We have a rise in discrimination, abuse of power, and greed. What are we leaving behind for our future generations? Maybe it's a time society takes a hard look at its values. While we have a list of panelists today, which I'd like to introduce, I look forward to seeing the many different opinions on this topic. So on today's webinar, we have Senator Mehreen Faruqi, Rabbi Zalman Kastel, Dr. Zuleyha Keskin, and Imam Adama Konda. So thank you for joining us here today, guys. So today on our speakers list is Dr. Mehreen Faruqi. Mehreen Faruqi is the Green Senator for New South Wales and spokesperson for education, housing, industry and animal welfare. She became the first Muslim woman to sit in Australian Parliament when she joined the New South Wales Parliament in 2013. Can we please have Senator Mehreen Faruqi to start? Thank you.
Thank you so much, Bassam, and thank you so much for your introduction to the topic today. It's wonderful, really, to start off with the 17-year-old young person, you know, speaking about the future and the legacy we leave, because it is a legacy we leave for your generation, really, and the generations to follow. But I'll start by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land that I am on, the Gadigal of the Eora Nation, and pay my respects to their elders, past and present, and to the elders of the lands that you are all on. As we know, this land was never ceded. It is, it always was, and it always will be Aboriginal land. I do also want to acknowledge that First Nations people still face the worst of discrimination, of racism and disadvantage that exists in Australia. And especially in the wake of the brutal killing of George Floyd in the US, I want to remind us all of the injustices to Indigenous Australians that are ongoing in Australia after more than 2 centuries of invasion and colonization. You know, the high and so disproportionate rates of incarceration, the deaths in custody, of which we've had more than 400 since 1991. Police brutality goes on, and the systemic disadvantage that they face in health and education is still pretty entrenched. And it just shows how much work still needs to be done to dismantle centuries of structural racism and white supremacy. Yesterday, I joined tens of thousands of people who marched in cities across Australia to show solidarity with First Nations people and the Black Lives Movement. And I think for me, it demonstrated that we are ready to make changes and stand alongside Indigenous Australians in their fight for justice, self-determination, and treaties. Because at the end of the day, there can be no social or environmental justice without racial justice. So on that rather somber note, I do hope that all of you are staying well and safe during these very challenging and trying times for so many around the world. It is so wonderful and such a privilege to be with all of you. Thank you so much for inviting me to the webinar today. I think it's fair to say that for most of us, this isn't the year we were planning it to be or imagining it to be. In many ways, the COVID-19 crisis has exposed so many fault lines, the inequalities, the injustices of the world that were already present. And this crisis has made them even more stark. So more clearly than ever, we've seen the vulnerability of millions of casual workers who live without a safety net. Our totally messed up housing system has left so many struggling to keep a roof over their heads. Public funding cuts over decades to our higher education system. And the corporatization of the sector has meant that they are in complete crisis at the moment, while the inequality between temporary and permanent Australian residents has also been laid bare, especially with the complete abandonment of international students by our government. So when we talk about the future and leaving a legacy, for me, young people come to the front of my mind. They are facing the worst youth unemployment and underemployment in history. They will also face the worst of the climate crisis that is upon us. So unless we address the challenges confronting young people now, the impacts will disadvantage them now and into the future. While some of the changes that many of us have fought for years have been made by the Liberal National Government with literally a stroke of a pen, like raising New Start, like basic income for many, free childcare. We also know that Prime Minister Scott Morrison has indicated pretty clearly that a snapback to business as usual is coming. And that's a real challenge because we cannot let that happen. We cannot go back to how we were before COVID-19 hit, because we have seen, so many more people have seen, the real inequalities that existed even before then. We can't let austerity politics destroy our chance to build a more fair and sustainable future for all. We know that austerity doesn't end crises, it just deepens them. And it's clear that if generations to come are to have hope of a meaningful life, we need nothing short of a remaking of the underlying systems, the root causes that sustain the very problems we've had for decades. So we must reclaim the planet-saving, life-making potential of our society from corporations and governments who are captured by corporations. The COVID-19 crisis has definitely knocked us sideways, but it has also opened up a window for us to reimagine what our global community, our society, and our planet should look like. So this is the exact time to reimagine everything. This is a time to lay out a vision for how we want Australia to be. Now is the time to map our way out of the climate, the social justice, and the economic crisis that we are in into a fairer, more just, and sustainable future. So the Greens and I have been working on a Green New Deal for Australia, which will set us up for a future where no one is left behind. A Green New Deal identifies that governments have a responsibility to invest in the transformative and visionary changes that we need. It recognizes the interconnected nature of our environment, our society, and economy. And most importantly, it puts people right at the heart of creating solutions. It's about essential services like water, energy, transport, housing, healthcare, being for the public. It's about universal access to what everyone needs to build a good life. And importantly, a Green New Deal we create in Australia must be global, it must be anti-racist, and it must be feminist. Because being a global citizen means that we must advocate for justice in other parts of the world. For example, for West Papuans, for the Uyghurs, and for Palestine, and much more. We must ensure fair trade, and we must increase our aid to the global South, especially our Pacific neighbors. Ramadan this year was so different from the previous years. This time of reflection and contemplation and prayer only heightened my realization for so many who are suffering through COVID-19 and have suffered even when there was no pandemic. And someone's just kind of reminded me that, of course, the plight of Kashmiris is part and parcel of that global fight for justice that we have. There are so many communities across the world who are suffering now and have been suffering for years. So for me, I'm even more determined than ever to build a bigger movement and forge stronger alliances with people who are usually left out and left behind. You know, First Nations people, migrants, precarious workers, people with disability, women, people of color, students. So we can make the big changes we need to make the world a better place. This is a time to imagine a much fairer and just world. And this is the time to get ready to fight for it. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Senator Mehreen, for your contribution. Your words really mean a lot. And let's go back to the part where you were addressing challenges with youth. And I think, you know, that really will help, you know, to be a better, you know, leave behind a better world. Because I think our youth have the ability to do so much through their voices and their campaigning and through protests. And I think it's really important that these issues are recognized by the youth. You know, climate change, the inequalities in the world, you know, many of the issues that you spoke about, and opening them up for maybe them to remap our strategies to fix the social issues, because I think they do have the power to do so. They just need to, you know, get that opportunity. And I think it's really important for many organizations and for the government to do so, because I think I can go on forever about this topic, you know, with youth. So thank you for that. I really appreciate it. So next on our agenda, we're gonna have Rabbi Zalman, Rabbi Zalman Kastel, who is the National Director of Together for Humanity, an organization of Muslims, Christians, and Jews working together in Australian schools to foster intercultural understanding. Rabbi Zalman.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here. And I also acknowledge the traditional owners of the land and the MIF, the Australian Multicultural Eid Festival and Fair, and the founder, Dr. Ashraf Ahmed. Salam alaikum to everyone participating. Shalom aleichem. Peace and blessings from God to all of you. I speak to you today both as a Jewish man and as the leader of a Muslim Christian Jewish organization, Together for Humanity. When I think about a legacy, I think about a legacy in which there is a feeling of belonging and connection and understanding between people who differ in their beliefs and cultures. But before we can get to belonging, connection, and understanding, we need to have some of the things Mehreen spoke about in terms of a world that is sustained. Rabbi Gamliel, one of the sages of old, taught in the book Chapters of the Fathers, and he says the world is sustained on three things: justice, truth, and peace. So before there can be understanding, or for understanding to be sustained, belonging, connection to be sustained, there needs to be that foundation of justice, truth, and peace. And I grew up in the United States, and so I feel a particular connection to the situation of African Americans. And I acknowledge the pain of African Americans there, but also as someone who's lived in Australia since 1994, I also express my solidarity with Aboriginal Australians who suffer racism here. Black lives matter. It shouldn't need to be said, but it does, unfortunately. And it not only needs to be said because there are people who behave violently towards people with dark skin, but also because of those of us who have fear of the other, including people like me. I grew up in New York, and I lived side by side with African Americans, but we might as well have lived in two different parts of the world because there was no contact between me and my African American neighbors. The one conversation I had as a young person, a little bit younger than Bassam, went like this. This is the one conversation I had with a black young person, as a young person myself. He said, "Give me your money." I looked at him, I was terrified. Although he wasn't armed, he was only a little bit taller than me, but I had such a deep fear of black people that I thought I was being mugged. But somehow, from some deep recess in my consciousness, I said, "You must be joking." And that was the end of the conversation. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were, but perhaps the joke was on me, that I was so racist and so narrow in my thinking that he was mocking me by telling me that he wanted to mug me. But also want to think about the pain that I grew up with and the fear we had, because there were situations of homes being burgled, there were muggings, there was the murder of a Jewish man from Melbourne at the hands of a black person in 1994. In 1990, I believe it was, when I came back from Australia to visit my parents, and there were riots, and my neighborhood looked like a war zone. None of that cancels out anything else. Two wrongs don't make a right. It's a terrible situation that we have that needs to be resolved with justice for all as a foundation for truth and peace, or as alongside the quest for truth and peace. And so my main point is that the evil actions of some individuals should never be allowed to become the basis of the attitudes that we have about groups. And there are a lot of people who will say that I'm not racist, but, and my good friend Donna Jacobs-Saif taught me that if we want to challenge bigotry and prejudice, we need to start with ourselves and to look inside of ourselves, to ask ourselves whether we're being the victims, not victims, but practitioners of unconscious bias, and that through our own thoughts, we are contributing to ongoing injustice. The way of self-examination is very important in Jewish tradition. Rabbi Moshe Chaim Luzzatto writes in The Path of the Upright, "I have come not to teach people something that you do not know, but to teach you what you already know." And Bassam mentioned before the need for a strengthening of the values of our societies. And in fact, it is exactly that Rabbi Luzzatto says. We need to focus on the ethical teachings, on what's happening inside of our hearts to become more generous, more just, more finer human beings. I read on Facebook last night someone who talked about teachers that complain that they're being asked to be responsible for moral formation and ethical understanding in young people. And they just want to teach as if the ethical teachings is an interruption in teaching. I would have thought it's the heart of teaching. So this is a big task, and it's not going to happen quickly. Also, Rabbi Tarfon says, the work is not for you to finish, but nor are you free to desist from it. I want to finish with a story about another sage, Choni HaMa'agel, the circle maker. Choni was once walking along and he saw a man planting a tree, and he said to the man who was planting a carob tree, "You seem like an older man. Will you ever eat from the fruit of this tree?" And the planter said, "No, I won't. It's going to take 70 years for this tree to be ready to give fruit. But I eat from the trees that were planted before me, and so I will plant for my children and their children." Choni HaMa'agel then lied down somewhere, had a bit to eat, and fell asleep and slept for 70 years. When he awoke, he came back to the tree and he saw someone eating from the tree, and he said to the man, "Are you the one who planted?" Because he didn't know how long he had slept. The man said, "No, I didn't plant this tree. My grandfather did." Choni HaMa'agel then went home and he asked the people there. He came home and he told them that he was Choni HaMa'agel. They didn't believe him because his children were no longer alive, only his grandchildren. He went to the study hall where people were studying, and they were studying his teachings. And they said it used to be in the days of Choni HaMa'agel that he would teach things so well, he would explain everything and everyone would understand. And he said, "I am Choni." And they looked at him like he was a madman. They didn't recognize him because he had been dead, as far as they were concerned, for 70 years, not asleep. He was miserable, and soon after he died. And the story tells us two things. Number one, we need to be responsible. Those of us, I'm 50, and we need to be responsible to people like Bassam and the people who come after Bassam. It's not just about what we build for ourselves, but what we leave for the next generation. But the second point is, human beings need to be known, to be understood for who they are. We need to be seen, we need to be understood. And Choni HaMa'agel comes back and he's not known, he's not seen. As Mr. Floyd wasn't seen for who he is, as so many people of color are not seen for who they are, and quite frankly, for people from other backgrounds who also are not seen for the people they are. We need to create a world in which we know each other, in which there is understanding and connection, peace and justice. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Rabbi Zalman. Very, very inspirational speech. And I think your point on "I'm not racist," but really hit me. It really did, because I felt that, and that line has been said to me a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people can relate to me. But thank you for that, Rabbi. I've worked with you on many, many different projects, and the fact that you can bring so many religious and cultural groups and have such a diverse organization is really inspirational. And I congratulate you on that. So thank you.
Thank you.
So now for our next speaker, MP Jihad Dib. Jihad Dib is a Labour member for Lakemba. He is the state's first lower house Muslim MP in New South Wales Parliament. And his stated purpose is to make a difference, which he definitely has done. I'd like to invite Jihad Dib to now say, thank you.
You're on mute.
You're on mute. I think you're on mute, yeah.
Here we go. Okay. Sometimes I think people mute me on purpose because they think I talk too much. Until bad jokes. Well, good morning, everyone. Of course, I want to begin by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the land and pay my respects to elders past and present, emerging, everybody tuned in today. And acknowledge everybody for their belief in their culture and their faith and their history. And I think it's a really important one. It's very unusual. Normally today we'd be over in Fairfield and we'd be making sort of these sorts of speeches, but maybe not as detailed in Fairfield, where for the past 36 years, the Eid festival has been going on. And I think in that point, I really want to acknowledge MEF and Mr. Ahmed Senior and of course Junior and the Ahmed family for what they do. The first time I went to the Eid festival in Fairfield, I wasn't sure what to expect. I thought it might have been, just a regular festival, but there was much more to it than that. There was a great deal of discussion about what's the purpose of things. And I think that then is a really good segue into what is the purpose of what we do? What is it that we do, and why is it that we do what we do? And what is it that we can do in a much better way to go? Bassam, I think the point that you've just raised going off Zalman is a really important one. I'm not racist, but is a constant thing. Or you'll be hearing things like, well, no, you're different. You're not like the others. Well, the truth is, mate, you actually are. And if people take the time to get to know one another, we can actually have a much better world. I've got the great privilege of sitting in the New South Wales Parliament and representing a great community. And sometimes people have said, oh, this guy is the Muslim MP. He's the MP for Muslims. And I say, well, actually, I'm the MP for people who have voted me in. But I am Muslim. Yes, that's who I am. But on the same token, that's not all that I am. I'm not that and nothing else. That's part of my faith. That's part of my belief structure. That's part of the value set that I've got. So I think that privilege of being the first was really important. And sometimes I underestimate just the value of that. And some of you may have heard this story before, but for me, the biggest challenge was my name. The name Jihad is not necessarily an easy name when you want to be entering a parliament in a Western society. And I said that when my parents named me, I'm sure that they didn't ever think that this is what I was going to do for a living. But they did name me because of the tradition, the grandfather. So my grandfather was Jihad, and I'm the eldest of the eldest, and so forth. And just as my father's name is Ali and my son's name is Ali, I would hope that maybe he keeps that tradition and the custom. And the reason I tell that story is because it tells you a little bit about the individual. Because if you just look at the packaging, what's very simple to see is, here's a bloke called Jihad, here's a Muslim, this is the package, this is the box that we want to put him into. But when you actually dig a little bit deeper and you discover people's personal stories, then you know a lot more. And lately I've been talking a great deal about this concept of us being a jigsaw puzzle. And we've got a jigsaw puzzle that we started before Ramadan that's sitting on our table. It's 1,000 pieces. I think we're still about halfway through there. Every day, I've got to say my wife is really the one who does it. I just pick one piece and stick it in there. But every single one of those puzzles is different. And every single one of those puzzles, though, has a connection to another. And ultimately, when all of those puzzle pieces will be together, what it will be this beautiful, like a beautiful picture. And I hope that that's a really important analogy of what we are as Australia. We are jigsaw puzzles. We're all different. We're all unique, but we all have to find a connection to one another. And when the connections are made with one another, then what you do is you all come together as one big, use it as a narrative. Now, I actually made a couple of different points, and I'm looking forward to seeing where people want to take it with this, but these really are very unusual times. And, thanks to God and thanks to everybody who's done the right thing, we've managed to do really well in Australia. You only have to turn on the news to see what's going on with COVID and the way that it's had an impact on society, especially in terms of people who have been sick, people who have died. And we have done so well. And I think that's a real credit to the Australian community. And I remember when this all started, we were worried. And I'll be frank with you. I saw some statistics and I heard some things that really freaked me out. I had a discussion with my daughter who thought that, this might have been all a bit blown out of proportion. I said, this is for real. This is for real. And it's our ability to be able to do it that was important. But with every problem actually also comes a solution. It comes something really good. If it wasn't for COVID, we wouldn't be doing this. If it wasn't for COVID, we might have made different sorts of connections, superficial ones. These are deeper connections. We've actually had to make the effort to try and get to know one another, to get to hear one another, to get to meet up with one another. And so I would think while people were at home reflecting, you know, because they had to sit at home and are with their families and maybe that connection back to the family, but they did reflect on what we could do to make the world a better place. And the world can always be a better place. I'm a big believer in this concept called Kaizen, which is a Japanese thing, and I always use it in everything I do. And Kaizen basically is do everything that you can to constantly improve. Our society is good, but what can we do that's better? In being at home, we reflected on the things that were really important. The amount of time that we spent, not with the ones that we love, I think really came to the fore. But also we started to reflect on those who probably being at home wasn't the best place for them. And there's a lot of people who being at home was actually more problematic than being out and about. The fact that we need people to rely on one another, to see each other. I missed not only, you know, I mean, obviously we talk about Ramadan, but I missed being able to see my friends for Passover. I missed being able to see my friends for Easter. Because just as I have my important articles of faith, I like to share their articles of faith because it's a mutual respect. I don't try and push my faith onto them and they don't try and push their faith onto me. We are, as the Holy Quran says, made of tribes so that we may all get to know one another. Because if we get to know one another, we actually get to know the things that make us tick and the things that are really important. And what's really important there is the character of the person that you are, the values that you have and the things that you do to make our society better. And even yesterday, you know, we saw the protests in Sydney and across the country and indeed across the world about that concept of the Black Lives Matter. Now, where it might have been something initially set up for what was happening in the United States, what was really important is to understand the significance that it has to our First Nations people in Australia. And as the Shadow Minister for Youth, I put something up the other day that said that I was quite mortified that, you know, juvenile justice centres are made up, half of the people in juvenile justice centres are of Indigenous background, and yet only 1 in every 15 kids is Indigenous. So where are we going wrong? What are we doing there? What's the actual solution? How do we make sure that somebody gets the right start in life? You know, but what was also interesting with the protests, you saw in New South Wales that it was first of all deemed illegal, then it was deemed legal. And so some people were able to make it down there, but the ones that I really admired were those who decided to stand in their driveway or out the front of their house and just say, this is what's really important to us. And I think that's a really significant point, because I suppose if we talk about injustice and we talk about fairness and we talk about equity and we talk about equality, when we can achieve all of those outcomes, then we've got a much better society. We are the best nation on earth. I cannot imagine wanting to live anywhere else. I can't see myself as anything but Australian. But with my Australianness also comes a deep history, my roots, my heritage, my family history, the things that I believe in. Now, that doesn't make me any less Australian. It just makes me an Australian with a bit of depth of something else. And I think that's the really important step. So as I look into the screen and I see the you belong key, that is it. We belong. Everybody belongs. And it's up to everybody to be able to make that difference that they can. Whether like me, you're a member of parliament, whether like Bassam, you're a student, whether you're like Zalman, whether you're like Mehreen, whether you're like the Ahmed family, whether you're somebody who doesn't necessarily have a position where you sort of say, you know, you're a community leader. We are all leaders in every single thing that we do. The good things that we do at a bus stop, the good things that we do at a shopping center, the good things that we do, the random acts of kindness, they all make a big difference. And I don't do it so that people can say, hey, this guy is of this particular faith, they're normal. I do it because it's a good human thing to do. And if all of us as good humans undertake good practices, then what we're doing is we're actually creating a much better world. Now I'm going to go back to my notes because I've gone way off script. And I just want to wrap it up with a few little things. And it touches on, I think, what we've got here is we've got a community of people who pretty much are thinking the same things. Everybody who's on this believes and values the things that are really important in life. Our challenge is to try and make those who are doubtful, those who don't know, those who are fearful, get them to start changing their way of thinking. Because if we're just in an echo chamber, then all we're doing is we're reassuring us what's really important. But what's the real change effect is when I can convince somebody else to start changing their way of thinking, to change their way of life, to change the way that they approach things. And we only do that through getting to know one another. Now, I can read anything about any particular person, but that doesn't give me the same understanding of when I actually shake their hand, or when I meet them, or when I share a meal with them, or when I actually engage in a proper discussion with them, when I take the time to get to know them as an individual, not, as I said before, that box that everybody fits into. People want to put you in a box, but we've got to make sure that we don't allow people to be put in boxes. And more significantly, we've got to make sure that we don't inadvertently put people in boxes. We've got to know that everybody is important, that everybody is unique, that everybody is different, that everybody has hopes, everybody has dreams, everybody has aspirations, everybody has a value set. And when we respect them for their value set and we take the time to get to know them, then maybe we actually create a better society. And in ways to go forward, and I know Mehreen did it, it's that responsibility. Everyone thinks, well, what is it that I can do? I'm just a so-and-so, there's not much that I can do. Everyone can do something. Everyone can do something. Now, it's easy to be active on social media. It's easy to be active on, Twitter and Facebook and be all, outraged and all that sort of thing. But true meaningful change actually involves a physical activity. So if it's about a peaceful protest, if it's about writing letters, if it's about making speeches, if it's actually about having the courage to stand by yourself with a sign that says something that you believe in, that's courageous. That's making a change. That's making a difference. Sharing and liking and all of that is pretty good, but a discussion is always much better. So if you get the chance, make that discussion. You see, we don't want to just make Australia a better place. It's inherent on all of us to make the world a better place. And in making the world a better place, you've got to speak out, excuse me, you've got to speak out against injustice. You've got to speak up for what's right. And you've got to support people who genuinely believe that the world can be a better place. If we bury our head in the sands and we say, somebody else will do it. Sorry. If we bury our head in the hand to say, our head in the sand, say somebody else will do it. The politicians will do it. The community leaders will do it. The so-and-so will do it. Well, what does that do for each individual? I suppose my final words would be that every single one of us, in whatever capacity, is a leader. Every single one of us can make a change. Every single one of us can make a difference, even if it starts from the smallest difference. But the first person that we need to make a difference to is actually ourselves. Because if we can change and we can better ourselves, then we've got a much bigger chance of being able to change and change others and help create a much better world. And I think on that point, I probably need to finish up saying the world that I want to see is a world where everybody is a fine human being, where everybody is a fine individual. Everybody is the best that they can be. Be grateful for what you have, but make sure that you always keep in mind that there's people with a lot less than that. And to that end, I have seen the most enormous acts of charity, particularly through the bushfire season, the drought, through this COVID pandemic. Charity, people giving up their time, people giving up their money, people checking in on their neighbours. Now, if you're willing to check in on your neighbour, you're willing to make sure that people are okay, let's not just do it during a pandemic. Let's do it during all the times, because together we can make a better world. So with that, Assalamu alaikum, peace unto you. I hope everybody has a blessed long weekend.
Thank you. Thanks for that, Jihad. And thank you for all your contributions and, everything you do in your community and in the society through this tough time. I'd also like to encourage and remind everybody in the chat section to select all panelists and attendees so that everyone can benefit from your wisdom and, from your words. So now I'd like to introduce Dr. Zuleyha Keskin. Dr. Zuleyha is the course director at the Center for Islamic Studies and Civilizations at Sturt University. He is also a senior lecturer in Islamic spirituality and contemporary Islamic studies. Please welcome Dr. Zuleyha.
Thank you, Bassam. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. As I was listening to, first I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of the land that we are on. I also want to congratulate me for this great event. 36 years of organizing amazing festivals, and I remember attending them when I was very young. I mean, I was fond memories, and I think a lot of us have fond memories with the festivals organised by MEF, and also thank you to AEST for organising this as well. Now, as I was listening to the former speakers, I was just going through my speech that I had prepared, and I think if I had papers here, I'd just throw them out now and just reconsider what I'm going to say, because I will not be reading my speech or my talk that I had prepared. What I will do is, what I thought I will do now is identify 3 areas that I will commit to leave a legacy for the youth for the future. One thing those who know me well will know, a phrase that I use a lot is we have to start on our circle of influence. So we all have a circle of influence. Some of ours may be greater than others. You know, Mehreen and Jihad's circle of influence might be greater than ours, but we all have one. That's the reality. And so we can make a difference. And that's the thing with change. It starts with the individual, and then hopefully it can have a ripple effect, or you get like-minded people coming together and to make a difference. I guess as a university academic, my first area of commitment would be with regards to research in Islamic studies. You know, it's actually a very tough time for universities. You would have heard about it in the news. Universities are expected to make about $15 to $20 billion deficit in 2020 because of the COVID, and many reasons, but one of them is, as was mentioned previously, because of international students not coming, but that's not the only reason why. And research depends on income. But where there's a will, there's a way, and hopefully we can do more research in this area to create awareness. And I say this with particularly the Islamophobia report in mind, which was published by Dr. Daria in twice already, 2014-15 and 2016-17, looking at submissions to the Islamophobia register. And some of the submissions are very, very painful to read. But what's important about this kind of research is we're living in a world where data is important, where stats are important, where having an official publication is important. And that's why these kind of research is where we're putting forward, saying this is the data showing that Islamophobia is a problem. This is the data that shows that, say, 50% of women who are experiencing Islamophobia have a child next to them. We have data saying that 70% of women who experience Islamophobia, everyone is a bystander, no one responds, no one does anything. So it becomes very important to have research with such data, which then gets picked up by the media and so forth, and which it did, it had a lot of media coverage. So it's important for us to continue this legacy of developing and continuing and growing the research, so that, research at the end of the day means knowledge, and knowledge means power. Now, the second commitment is in education of One Nation's people. As a course director, one thing that I have to do is when we do courses, when we do course reviews, we need to make sure that we have an Indigenous cultural competency component. Now, this is something that we need to do at the university level for all courses. I'll start with my own courses, but it's essential that we have a better understanding of the First Nations people, their history, with their struggles, their challenges, but also successes. I'll never forget, I attended this seminar, which was done by our Indigenous Studies head of school, and she told us about how we need to deconstruct our thinking about Indigenous people and not group them. Very similar to what's been discussed here. And, she said at the end of the day, all we're trying to achieve is we don't want people to hate our Aboriginal people. And I thought we brought the bar so low that that's what we're aiming for. And, I mean, I wasn't critical of her. She obviously knows what's out there and what people are thinking and what potentially students are thinking, but that's where the bar is. We don't want people to hate Aboriginal people, wider community to hate Aboriginal people. So we need to do better. We need to do better in educating and, ensuring that everyone's better informed about the challenges and the opportunities as well. I think my third area, the third one where I would commit to in hopefully leaving a legacy for the future, is within our Muslim community and ensuring all sectors of our Muslim community have better opportunities, they have a platform, especially in three areas. with this Black Lives Matter, I guess, movement, it's been an eye-opener for many of us. Those of us who thought we weren't racist, we realized that we may have subconscious racism. Those of us who thought others aren't racist, we realized that they are racist. I'm not racist, but, as was mentioned. So it's been a way, this is where we need to make change. Posting about it, putting our black screens, they're all good too, but we need to walk the talk. We can't just say, well, remember Bilal radiallahu anh. We can't say, oh, our Prophet said this. We all know this. A lot of us know these examples, but we're not implementing it into our lives. We're not implementing it into our organizations. So it's really about time for us to do some self-reflecting and make changes within whether it's schools, whether it's high schools, whether it's in our mosques, our organizations. Are we being racist towards anyone? Are we giving opportunities to people of different faiths, different colors and cultures? So we need to really think about this and talk about it in our management committees. But also to women, we need to give women more opportunities and more platforms in our Muslim community. We need to empower the women. We have some amazing, capable, educated women who do not have the voice or the platform that they should because they are women. And we also need to empower our youth. When I see youth and, looking at Bassam, I'm just amazed. When I was 17, you wouldn't hear a peep out of me. I was just so shy. There was no way I would be able to MC such an event. I could just imagine, what, the future holds for Bassam. I'm just so amazed with that. But we need to empower the youth. They have ideas, they have energy, they have a vision. But more often than not, we as the elders, and I am old now, older, we put blockades in front of them. We say, yeah, it's a good idea, but nah, or look, I'm in charge. Or when we do get the youth involved, we use them tokenistically. Yeah, look, I've got a youth in my community, here he is, but just don't talk, okay? That kind of thing. And that's just not good enough. One of our students who's also quite an activist in the community, Zainab Murad, did research. I was just shocked at how youth are deterred from being involved in Muslim organizations because they are not given a voice. So, and then imagine if you are a Black Muslim woman who's young. So that's 3 levels of barriers I mentioned. One could be color or culture, one could be youth, and one could be a woman. So imagine you've got all 3 barriers. Like, what chance are we giving to such, individuals? So I think we all, and including myself, will commit to ensuring that in this area as well, that I empower and provide opportunities for people of all ethnic backgrounds, women especially, and also youth. So hopefully if we all commit today, I would love to see everyone commit to something they will do differently to leave a legacy for our youth for tomorrow. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Zuleyha, for your very meaningful and kind words. I'd just like to remind everyone that you can ask a question in the Q&A section, as we will be spending time asking the panelists the Q&A questions. So please go ahead and write down a question to be asked to the panelists. So now I'd like to invite Imam Adama Konda. Imam Konda is the Imam at the Canberra Islamic Centre and a teacher at the Islamic School of Canberra. Thank you. Please welcome Imam Konda.
Alhamdulillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. All praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the originator of the heaven and the earth and whatever exists. We thank him for Moses and the Torah. We thank him for Jesus Christ and the gospel. We thank him for Muhammad and the Quran. Peace and blessings of Allah on all of these mighty messengers who left for us the best legacy. And we're talking about legacy. And the life we live in this world, as I said, I will talk about the world we live in and how we can make it better and leave a better legacy driven by the willpower provided by faith. And to talk about the world we live in, I want to say in the beginning, I recognize and respect those people of Nanawa who were destined to walk the land before any one of us. And I want to say thank you to my brothers and sisters in the race. And to ask myself, do we really understand what racism means? And if we really do, we will be proud to be a racist. If a racist means, I love my race, and my race is a human family. This is where Allah put us. And then I will count the birds, another race, the animals, another one. So if we really understand racism and we take it the way it was revealed, we will live for one another and we will not live on one another. We will give air to one another to breathe and will not stop one another from breathing. But the world we live in, as we know, we're living in a time, really, we need to speak of our peace, because many nations wedded themselves to immoral wars, driven by some leaders from both sides, religious leaders and political leaders, and they are aborting the peace that young people like Bassam want to run. As we know, as parents, our children are the extension of our life. And without them, we don't have a legacy. And the best legacy to live in this world is to live the best Allah made on it, the human being. They are the seeds of the future. The world we live in, we are drowning in the water of sexism, racism, and classism. So we need to talk more about brotherhood and sisterhood in its true meaning. The world we live in is suffering the secular pluralism, in another word, and moral relativism. In another word, everything goes. People don't need truth or morality or values. There is nothing absolutely right and there is nothing absolutely wrong. It depends what you want. This is the world we live in. But we have to call this, it is a past. And we should never look at the past. We look at where we are going in the future. We have to talk of hope to confront hopelessness. And as a Muslim, we need to observe the Quran. As a Christian, observe the gospel. As a Jew, observe the Torah, because if we do, we will reunite the family of God again, which we have divided through misunderstanding racism. Every prophet came to bring people together. But somehow, something happened along the way, and we can see the family of God is divided. What happened? Something wrong happened. And we don't want to leave a legacy that will put the seed of hate and wrong racism in our children's life. They have the right to come into a world that have been paved for them by true parents, by true leaders, and by true believers and non-believers. It is to do with race we're talking about. And we have to have the positive mind, because a negative mind can never produce a positive life. What happened to George Floyd made the human problems act out. It is happening every day. Truly, we cannot breathe. In so many parts of this world, we cannot breathe as a human race. and we need to breathe. Otherwise, we abort the life that God has given all of us. We cannot breathe in Afghanistan. We cannot breathe in Kashmir. We cannot breathe in every part of the world, I can say. But we need to breathe. The legacy comes maybe after we die. Life ends and legacy begins. And you may become more famous after you are gone due to what you have done. And you may become more familiar after we are gone. But the bottom line is that what are we leaving behind and what type of world we are leaving behind for our children? Who has the right to live a better life? Government is formed to preserve life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Religion is there for what? To remind humanity the purpose of their life. And if we don't live up to that title, we cannot claim Muhammad, peace be upon him. We cannot claim Jesus Christ, peace be upon him. We cannot claim Moses, peace be upon him. Because we use their name preaching heaven and living hell. And that is wrong. That we can pass on to the children who have the right to know what really happened. The world we live in. Human rights table has been vandalized. And many people are watching. And I can say more than 7 billion people watched a man in uniform put his knee on somebody's throat, and he was told, I can't breathe. And that man was protected and guarded, supported by another 3 men. Is this who we are? Is this who we really want to be? What are we? We need to breathe. If we want to talk about legacy, we need to breathe. If we want to talk about legacy, we need to learn the art of death in order to enjoy life. And remember, and I will close with this, remember the blessings from the storms of life. All the problems is coming to wake us up to live up to our title. And what is our title? A human being. But in order for that to happen, to leave a better legacy, we need to go back to education. Because through education, cultivate the divine spark in every human being. We need to go back to the true faith. And our life needs to be driven by the true faith. And the true faith will always awaken the moral consciousness in every human being. And that moral consciousness produces the self-accusing spirit. And when you have that spirit, you cannot do wrong and go to sleep. It will remind you what you did is wrong. You should not do that. But there is a problem. Many people kill the messenger from within because they don't want to hear the opposition. So they silence that messenger from inside and go ahead and do something wrong in impunity. So for us to have a legacy, we need to correct our system. And the system means the way we speak, the way we think, and the way we understand. We need to learn again how to be a human being. Many people lived on this planet. They had a look at the sun, the moon, the clouds, and they rode horses. They are gone. Now we are here. The same thing will happen to us. But before we go, we need to bury the seed of a happy life, and we call that our legacy, our future. I will say thank you to Bassam, and remember, I'm proud to see you in this age, bringing the world together. And I will say you are the extension of the new dawn for this community, inshallah. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you very much, Imam Konda, for your beautiful words. We are so glad that we could have you on our panel today, and we'd like to also thank all the other panelists for joining us today. So now we've finished all the speeches, and we'd like to move on to the Q&A segment. Another reminder: if you'd like to ask a question to the panel, please use the Q&A function. So we're going to keep it nice and short with the answers, please, because we're running a bit short on time. We'd like to get through as many questions as possible. So the first question from Zia Ahmed. Prophet Muhammad clearly abolished the idea of racism during his final sermon. How can we, as a global community, deal with people as individuals rather than that by judging them by their skin color or their religion or cultural differences? So panel, maybe Rabbi Zalman, if you'd like to start.
Yeah, I think that we probably need to take a staged approach. The Prophet's message, I think, will take some work. I think before we can get to the ideal where every single individual is judged, as Martin Luther King Jr. said, for the content of their character rather than the color of their skin, we also need to recognize that people are members of groups, and that people need to think about the inherited prejudices that we pick up from the media, from family members, and we need to challenge those, and we need to have honest conversations with the other. We need to think about which perspectives we're hearing. What are we reading? Whose points of view are we engaging with? And who is silent? Whose views do we not hear? Whose experiences do we not hear? So I think, yes, ultimately we can get to a point where each individual person is celebrated as the beautiful human being that they are. Each person is equal to the whole world. Each person is unique. But at this point, I think we need to do a dual track approach. We need to recognize that people are members of groups, and ask ourselves, what groups are we afraid of? What groups do we see as maybe less than or less deserving than? And get to know them and hear their experiences. You know, there are a lot of people who see someone in a niqab and they feel afraid of them. Who's behind the niqab? What do they think? Why do they do that? Do people take the time to bother? There are a lot of people who are afraid of people who look like me. People that associate me with politics overseas and injustice overseas and problems overseas. But I'm a human being. I'm a person. I'm a Jew. And I think that that I would suggest that as a first track, and I've said in my comments in the chat, now with social media, there are opportunities to get to know people, to listen to videos, people telling their stories, particularly for Jewish and Muslim people who are engaged with their faith. There's a Facebook group called Abraham's Tent, where there's a lot of religious discussion of people connecting at the point of faith. So there are a lot of opportunities. And of course, today is a beautiful example of that as well.
I might just jump in there for a sec, Bassam, if that's all right.
Yeah.
And just picking up on what Zalman was saying, one of the really important things that I think we can do, and I like to think of things in a practical way, we can get to know one another, but I think there's a fair bit in terms of that we could do, whether it's through the media, whether it's through entertainment. So, for example, more often than not, unfortunately, what we find is people who come from a certain cultural group, when they're appearing on television, only serve to reinforce a negative stereotype that may already exist. I think I'd love to be able to turn on the television and see what modern Australia actually looks like, because if you turned on the television, most often than not, you would think that Australia wasn't a multicultural nation. You wouldn't think that there was people from all different faiths and backgrounds, or no faith, who make up the Australian community. And so when we actually get to see a reflection of who we are as a society in our parliaments, on our television screens, in our boardrooms, in places of influence, then what we're also doing is we're showing that you can be anything and you're actually judged on your ability and on the character that you have. When we don't see that, then what we do is we inadvertently perpetuate that negative stereotype. Because then what happens is you get a situation like you had before, Bassam, where someone will say, oh, but you're different. Well, the fact of the matter is you're not really different. It's just that you've had an opportunity to be able to be presented. So creating opportunities is a first step. Racism is an abhorrent thing. And sadly, you know, it's there. And I can't see it sort of going away. You know, I'd love to be able to wave a magic wand, as everybody would. But what we can do is we can mitigate it. And the way that we mitigate it goes back to the thing that all of the panelists were talking about. It's about that. And I see the lovely Mehreen on the screen. And, you know, Mehreen and I, we come from different political viewpoints, but enormous respect for one another. And, you know, Mehreen being in the position that she is and having the profile that she does and not shying away from the person that she is as an individual. Will you imagine the changes that has in terms of changing people's perspectives, but more significantly, the inspiration that serves to people who have been told, well, you're different and you can't. So one of the best ways, I think, to be able to address racism comes down to that first principle of actually getting to know one another, which takes away a fair bit of the racism to begin with. And I think that that's an onus on all of us. Now, people are not keen on quotas, but you've got to be able to give some opportunities to those who otherwise keep going through, whether it's the bamboo ceiling, the glass ceiling, whatever ceiling that you want to call it. There is a ceiling that a lot of people can't get through, and that only serves to further perpetuate it.
Very well said.
Bassam, I know this time is limited, but could I quickly add something?
Yes.
And thank you, Jihad, for that. I really value your friendship. But I was going to say, apart from what we talked about, like the everyday racism that individuals inflict on individuals, there is this real issue of institutionalized racism that exists in like systemic ways in the structures in our society, in our politics, you know, in our laws, and especially for First Nations people. That is what that has been playing out even after we dismantled the White Australia policy. Really, those structures that allow, you know, 28% of the population in prisons to be Aboriginal when they only are 3% of the population overall in the community, the deaths in custody, the disadvantage that they face in health and education. That will only be done when we dismantle those core systems. And that will require all of us to be much bolder and much more courageous than we have been before.
Well said. Okay, I think we'll move to the next question. So we have a question. Are we as a Muslim community championing and fighting for the rights of other minorities? And how else can we engage in the manner while protecting the image of our community, especially in relation to the issues we face in our community in dealing with rights and responsibilities? Panel, maybe, would anyone like to start?
But Sam, can you just reread the question? Sorry, I've lost it. I don't know how everyone else went, but at one stage it went a bit tinny, so I got bits of that question.
Are we as a Muslim community championing and fighting for the rights of other minorities? And how else can we engage in the manner while protecting the image of our community, especially in relation to the issues we face in our community in dealing with rights and responsibilities?
I'll have a shot at it, Bassam.
Yeah, okay.
So, you know, I'm not speaking for all of the Muslim community, because I think sometimes just talking about the Muslim community does us disservice as well. We are made up like any other community of amazingly diverse people from so many different backgrounds. And I think that's the beauty of our community. That's the beauty of Australia as well. But I think at this particular time, especially because we are being discriminated against across the world for, you know, for our religion or for what we look like, what we wear, we are much more acutely aware of the injustices faced by others in society. And I think that, you know, especially younger people that I meet young Muslim women and men almost every single day in Australia who are so fired up about doing something about the climate crisis, you know, about Aboriginal disadvantage, you know, about young people who, you know, are just being left behind at this moment. So I think the Muslims across Australia and across the world really are standing up, are joining movements. Just yesterday in the rally, because I could identify so many Muslim women. There was such diversity. There was so many people of color. I haven't seen so many come out to rallies ever before. So I think things are changing, but I also understand that, most of us are migrants, and I understand because I came here and as a migrant in my 20s, that it's when you come to a new country, it takes a while to settle in, to, to get a roof over your head, to find a job, to settle your children in if you have children. That it took me 12 years to actually kind of start my contribution to society. So one of the things we can do in Australia is to make change and make, life easier for migrants when they come, provide much better support so we can all become part and parcel of our democracy much faster than is currently the case.
Yeah, that's right. That's definitely right.
I'll just add a little bit onto that, Bassam, and I agree with what Maria's saying. I think particularly when I say young people, I always feel like an old person when I say young people. But what I actually find now, especially with, say, call it the second or third generation of Muslims since the 1970s, who have grown here, who have been educated here, have got an incredible sense of social justice. There is a huge sense of social justice that I see with young people, but I see it particularly with the Muslim community. I go back to, they certainly advocate. I mean, in terms of First Nations rights and responsibility, it respects the Muslim community, and the young people are there. And there's something that I hope that I'm working on, and hopefully we can do it soon, but it involves a collaboration between the Muslim community and First Nations community as well, to an extent. But that sense of social justice also comes from having lived an experience where they themselves have been at the other end of the racism stick, or those who haven't had the opportunity, or know what it's like when you're made to feel like you don't belong, know what it's like to be questioned about your Australianness, so to speak, knowing what it's like to be judged by the way that you look, or by the language that you speak, or the faith that you practice, or even the food that you eat. Where I think was a big turning point, and particularly most recently, I think like any community, with a sense of there's an aspiration, but people have gone through, say, the education system and whatnot, and established themselves, establishing their groups. They're not doing things just to support the Muslim community. What I'm seeing is a lot of groups, and a lot of Muslims especially, are doing things to support the wider Australian community. That we are part of one big Australian community, and this is what we happen to practice, and it's what we happen to believe. But I'll come back to, because I was so heavily involved in it, I could not be more proud than the effort of the Australian Muslim community during the bushfire crisis, during the drought, and during the pandemic. And the reason I say that is because I saw, and I was a part of, a commitment that saw hundreds and thousands of dollars that were raised, hundreds and thousands of dollars worth of food that was taken down, food that was driven down, emergency equipment, all sorts of things. That to me also was a really important one, because it showed those who had not had much to do with the Muslim community that the Muslim community in Australia is one part of it, but also that we're driven by the same things, but that sense of compassion and that sense of belonging that everybody does, as part of an Australian society. And I think that is a really important one. So I certainly advocate and certainly fight for rights, but certainly also a greater sense of maturity. And I think an openness like I haven't seen for a long time. To me, I think in the last 5 years, there's just been enormous steps forward.
Yep. That's correct. No, well said. So I think we're going to try to fit in one more question, which I think is really important to end the topic with the Q&A with, considering the topic today. So what are some tools the youth have access to give them a louder voice, or tools to allow them to act as they for their concerns? Imam Konda, you're a bit quiet. What do you think?
He's on mute.
Yeah. Imam Konda, you're on mute.
Unmute. Yep, you can hear me now?
Yes, yes.
Okay. For the youth, the first thing really for every human being actually, to accept yourself as you are and be. Because the first law in life is the self, to observe yourself and make sure that you exist. The world need to know that you are here. Belong to something. Live up to your identity. And remember your responsibility as a Muslim especially. We are not employed by choice, but by divine order as a Muslim. And as a Muslim especially, the Quran told us, you have been created and sent out for humanity. So once you know your task, you will think every day how to accomplish that task without waiting for anything from anybody else. So, and this is a beginning, it comes from within. You need to decide to create your own destiny, and the tools are around. This universe is just like look at a baby. When a baby is born, see how tiny they are. But they start their life with a struggle. And who taught them that struggle? What they start to do? To suck. And they believe with the struggle, milk will come out of the breast of my mother. This universe is a big breast for all of us. And we just need to start the struggle without waiting any support from anyone. If it comes, so be it. Otherwise, do for the self and believe in yourself and belong to something. It's very important to belong to something. Join an organization, a team that you think what they are doing is worthy, and so on. It means you are the master of your own destiny and the captain of your own life. So we just start driving, but use your faith as a driving force for that. I believe, and my belief will be driving my footsteps in my life, because the guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is really clear. We just need to allow this guidance to go into our heart and then run the affairs of our life.
Thank you for that, Imam Konda.
Bassam, can I add to that?
Yes, that's right.
So the question being about what tools are there, I just feel like within the question, there's this impression that the responsibility falls upon the youth. I think with any sort of discrimination, we have to understand that the responsibility falls upon everyone. Just like with this Black Lives Matter, it's not an issue for the Black community. It's all of our issue. That's why I think it's very important for, if we're talking about in the Muslim context, Muslim organizations, to think about how much they are empowering the youth, but and if they're not, what changes they are willing to make to ensure that they do. But with regards to tools, I think mentoring is a big part of growth for youth. I would love to see more mentoring opportunities, whether it's organized or just, sort of random. So I think that's something that youth can do, find themselves a mentor and learn from them. There's two, the thing about, say, young people and the older people, let's call them the wiser people. The older people have a lot of experience, so they've got a lot of wisdom that you can benefit from. And the young people have a lot of energy and ideas and, things that they want to do. So when those two come together, you have this amazing synergy that can happen. So I do think those two should come together more often. So a mentor is a great tool to have, but, also getting involved in organizations and finding, roles that exist in those organizations and being, empowered and active through those organizations. And if worse comes to worse, establish your own youth organizations. There are many already, but they're a great tool to be a voice if you find that you're not fitting in anywhere else. So that would be my encouragement to youth.
Well
I can
said.
just throw in one of the things that we found with some of the work we've been doing on an interfaith basis has given children confidence to be able to find their voice, to feel like they're not helpless, they're not alone, that these experiences that they see within their own communities are mirror experiences in other communities. And what the researchers that are looking at those experiences telling us is that for some, it normalizes the problems, but it also gives people a deeper understanding of what the problems are and gives them the courage and the confidence to find their own voice, and possibly we can see lots more people like Bassam taking their place. I put in the comments just a link to a video if people want to get a bit of a taste of that. And we'd love to see greater collaboration with people from different communities in doing those kind of services from Together for Humanity's point of view.
Yeah, well said. Thank you to the panelists and to everyone asking the questions. Sorry we couldn't get through all the questions. We're running a bit short on time. I guess now we're going to move to Imam Konda to make a special dua, a special prayer.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم ربنا آتنا في الدنيا حسنة وفي الآخرة حسنة وقنا عذاب النار ربنا لا تزغ قلوبنا بعد إذ هديتنا وهب لنا من لدنك رحمة إنك أنت الوهاب اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم غير المغضوب عليهم ولا الضالين. I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to grant us goodness in this life and the life to come, to grant us legacy that we can live here and take it with us when we are living, also to meet him in the world beyond. And I pray to him to keep us firm on the path and not to let us deviate because of any circumstances. And I pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us good ending and make our today better than our tomorrow and our tomorrow better than the next days to come. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Such a beautiful prayer, you know, to end such a beautiful event, and hopefully better days to come. So now I'd like to invite Ali Alsalami for the vote of thanks.
Thank you, panelists, especially the panelists, for being very kind to attend and participate. Thank you all for participating on Facebook also and on the webinar. Hope you all benefited. Look, you have already made the world a better and peaceful place. Thank you very much. MEF in 2021, please attend. I hope you will enjoy next year. As this year we only had this webinar. Thank you very much. Assalamu alaikum and peace be upon you.
Thanks, everyone.
Alaikum assalam wa barakatuh.
Salam to everyone.
Thank you. It's an honor to be with you all, to hear all of your wisdom. Inshallah,
Thank
that
It
our
was
efforts.
lovely sharing the platform with you all. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks.